Good evening everyone, welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update tonight, the 17th of January 2014, and tonight we have a new tropical cyclone called Tropical Cyclone June, and Tropical Cyclone June developed just to the east of the Australian area of responsibility a little earlier this afternoon and is now pushing in a southerly direction towards New Caledonia. Expected at this point in time maybe just to the west of New Caledonia, but we'll show you a bit of model guidance to see exactly where the models are predicting it to go. Furthermore, we'll chat about the WA low, which is now inland in the really eastern inland of WA and going to start to push west tomorrow towards the Pilbara coastline, and we'll talk more about the rainfall potential of that system and also just the odd chance that it may form into a tropical cyclone. But at this stage it is likely to remain either inland, or by the time it gets to the coast, it may get to the coast too far to the west, and the water temperatures may not quite be conducive for its further deepening into ATC. Furthermore, after that, we're going to talk about a new tropical low that's expected to push west from Fiji and into the Coral Sea, and the longer term predictions of that particular system are still in limbo, but there is just the slight chance that it may actually make it to the Queensland coast and thereby dumping a fair bit of rain, with a very remote possibility that it could be a tropical cyclone on landfall. But it still looks like it's going to be the first westward moving tropical system in the Coral Sea that we've seen for a very long time. So fingers crossed that that happens. And we'll also talk about a new low that could form over WA in the long run as well. So we've got a fair bit to get through, so let's start. Alrighty, so here's Tropical Cyclone June, the latest track map from the Fijian Met Bureau, and we can see it's a Category 1 system. It's packing a lot of gales to its east and its south, but not packing too much to the north. And we expect Tropical Cyclone June to continue pushing in a south to southeast direction, a little bit closer to the Aussie coast. You can see Brisbane right on the edge of your screen there, but really not going to impact us in any real way. Maybe a little bit of swell increase over the southeast coast, but even that's fairly doubtful with such a weak system here. It's going to be a Category 1 as it passes to the west of Noumea and just to the west of New Caledonia, but at this stage there is still an error margin there that's a fair error margin that goes all the way through to almost on top of Noumea and also about 300 or 400 kilometres west of that. So there's a fair error margin there. Look, it's moving pretty quickly, so probably by tomorrow afternoon it's likely to have passed New Caledonia, and it's expected to then push in a south to southeast direction, and Norfolk Island, which is an Australian island, they may come under the influence of the outer gales in that system. But once again, it all depends on the error margin here and exactly how it moves and exactly how it transitions from a TC to an extratropical cyclone on its approach to Norfolk Island in the longer term. But at this stage, folks in Noumea may expect to see a very fast period of gales. So they're not going to last very long because the system, as I say, is just moving at a great rate of knots, and so it's not going to sit over any particular location for too long. But they are on that eastern semicircle, so you can see here that the eastern semicircle is packing a larger gale radius than, say, the northwestern. So because Noumea will be lying on the eastern and southeastern semicircle of that system, there is a chance there that they will experience gales from the system. Model guidance is pretty clear on this one. It's not going to do too much tricky, funny business like a couple of them have done in the past few years, where they've started to, but they've rounded the New Caledonian Islands and then started to come back to the west. Not going to do any such thing. This one's pretty clear cut in the way it's moving. There's very little in terms of doubt in the general track. It's just a matter of the intricacies of the track. So we're not expecting any type of westward movement of this system. We probably won't be keeping you too much up to date with this particular system since it's not in Australian waters, so we do encourage you to visit the Bureau of Meteorology in Fiji, and their website is www.met.gov.fj, and they'll have the latest track maps and advices for this particular system. But as Oz Cyclone Chasers, our interest in this particular system really stops at 160 once the system starts to move further away from that. It's not really of interest to us anymore, unless it's obviously a massive system and a noteworthy system worldwide. So just a quick look at the model guidance from the European. Friday 10 p.m. Here it is, well to the northwest of the island, and Eumea's here. You can see they're getting 20 to 25 knot winds. If you keep track of the different colorings showing the various winds, once you get into yellow, you're looking at 25 to 30 knots. Once you get into the orange, you're starting to look at gale force winds. And so you can see that the system continues to track in a south to southeast direction, passing just to the west of the northwest tip of the island, and then continuing in a south to southeast direction further on. If we then track it also, because we are interested being an Australian island, the Norfolk Island. So there's Kingston on the Norfolk Islands, and so if we continue to push this system through into Sunday and then into Monday, we can see that the system undergoes what we call extratropical transition, and we see that Kingston is going to definitely, or very, according to most model guidance, is very likely to cop some gale force winds from the system, but we're just not sure whether it'll actually be a TC at that point anymore, because it is likely to have transition to a non-tropical cyclone. But you can see here Kingston and the rest of Norfolk Island are expecting some pretty strong winds from this particular system as we head through Sunday and into Monday. So probably even stronger winds going to affect Norfolk Island than they're going to affect New Caledonia, believe it or not. Here's the latest UK Met track ensemble forecast. You can see every single ensemble member pushes it west of Noumea, but continues it pretty well in a straight line. Not often you see such good guidance from the ensembles. So you can see here almost directly south to southeast, or south-southeast I should say, from here on, and the system moves at a fairly decent rate of knots through the entire period. So excellent, very clear guidance here from the models, and really they've done really well with this particular cyclone from about 3 or 4 days ago. They've really pegged it really well, so no problems there. And this will be the last we'll really touch on this system, and now we'll talk about the WA one. Alright, let's look at this little beauty. Look at it here, really good signature, really good structure of this tropical low. Perhaps the last couple of hours it seems to have just lost a little bit of its structure, but I'll tell you what, if this had found itself over water right now, it would be bombing. But as it is right now, it's got good structure, it's got a great monsoon flow from the north, it's got a great outflow channel here associated with this trough system coming through, so it's all systems go for this thing. It's not just going to die in the inland desert regions, it is going to thrive. In behind this trough we have a new ridge, so coming in you can see the clear air here on the satellite in behind it. Now what that ridge will do is it's going to now adopt, or make this thing adopt, a more westerly movement pattern. So it should start to move more to the west, and exactly how far west it goes, still in limbo. At this stage though, it is expected to get very close to the coast, and that's great news if you're looking for rain on that northwestern coast, the northwestern coast from sort of Derby southwards all the way through, even probably as far west as Onslow and Exmouth could be seeing some decent rain out of this system in the medium to longer term, so great news for them. So if we look at the GFS ensemble guidance, and we can see that the system really now stops moving further to the south and basically pushes directly west under the influence of the new building ridge underneath it. And what happens though is that the ridge progresses eastwards across Central Australia, and therefore they're going to find themselves, so if you think about a high pressure system in here, they're going to find themselves on the northwestern periphery of that ridge, and so it's going to, the cyclone, or the low, sorry, at that point in time, will eventually, according to this guidance, adopt a more southwesterly track once it heads very close to the Pilbara coast. Look, it's still going to be very close, and still going to be close enough that it's going to bring in this northwesterly feed of the monsoon. We're going to see convergence, we're going to see a lot of rainfall in the vicinity of the low and to the north and east of the low. So wherever it goes, if you're north of it and if you're east of it, you're going to see a lot of rain. If you're west of it or south of it, probably not going to see the type of rainfall that that you're hoping for. But north and east of it, you are definitely in the hunt there for some really good rain. Possibly even over the course of time, you could be seeing some record-breaking falls there in parts of the inland regions. So there's our GFS model track. Now we've already seen that. Let's have a look at some of the others. The UKMet model keeps the system a little bit further to the inland and really weakens that ridge out pretty dramatically and pushes it eastwards, and therefore we see a much sharper poleward turn on the UKMet and a little bit earlier. So it's expected to push to the west, getting close to the Pilbara coastline. Now look, that's maximum rain potential right there at its closest point of approach to the Pilbara coastline will be its maximum rainfall potential, particularly once again north and east of the low. And same thing with the European, although they don't push it directly west, they push it in more of a west-southwest direction. But you can see here, it really hugs the coast, just inland of the coast. Now that's best case scenario. If you want rain, folks, that is best case scenario right there, what the European is doing to it. It's just really hugging the coast. It's only 100 or so kilometres inland, or 100 to 200 kilometres inland for the coast for about 48 to 72 hours, so about 3 days of it right there, and then eventually pushing further to the southwest around Coral Bay. And so look, it's an extreme scenario. You don't see this very often, and so that's why we're led to believe that there are potentially some rainfall records to be broken here if the system can be as slow moving as the European and some of the other modelling is showing us, and remaining as close to the coast as it is, and also maintaining some semblance of its current structure. We could be seeing some record breaking falls here over the 5-day period. So the next 4 days, look, if you're in this inland region, you could be looking at 200 to 300 millimeters from this particular thing. I mean, that's record breaking no matter where you are there, in that inland eastern parts of the Western Australian region, western parts of the Northern Territory. That's crazy rainfall. It's unheard of. And if you're a little bit or more on the coast, you're probably looking at just very heavy falls, but maybe not quite record breaking. 100 to 150 millimeters over the next 4 days there on parts of the coastline of the Kimberley, and then into the Pilbara we're even starting to look at 25 to 50 mils in parts. And as we head to the next 4-day period after that, have a look what happens to rainfall. So this is from the 21st to the 24th. We still see an amazing amount of rain over inland WA, but it actually starts to push more towards the south as that system starts to recurve. But we still see parts of the Pilbara coastline 50 to 100 millimeters for another 4 days. So you're still looking at a lot of rain, folks. So this whole thing overall could be very much record breaking for inland WA. Probably not quite record breaking for coastal regions unless the system gets right up to the coast, but you're still going to be seeing some heavy rain. Although, once again, if you're west and south of the system itself, you're not going to see very much at all. So if you head down to places like Perth and Geraldton, of course, you're not going to see much out of it at all. It's hard to tell from this graphic. We're shifting our focus now from the WA system and the current Southwest Pacific system to the MJO and looking at the next system in the Southwest Pacific. It's hard to tell, but what you can see here is this blue line, this MJO line, is just starting to redevelop here over the Coral Sea, or the Eastern Maritime Continent. Now we're going to see that signature push further to the east, I should say, over to the Western Pacific. Now this increase in MJO over the coming 7 to 10 day period is going to result, or is very likely to result, in the development or the formation of a new low pressure system somewhere between Vanuatu and Fiji. Now that low pressure system is quite likely to move west into the Coral Sea. So by next Friday, we have a system to the west of Vanuatu here, quite a recognised low pressure system on the GFS. Now be careful, the GFS does often overestimate things, but when we also look for the European model, who tends to underestimate things at fairly long lead times, we find a very similar type of scenario, although the European is much more conservative with its development of the low and keeps it a long way further to the north, up here to the north once again of Vanuatu. Now it is important to understand that the European is struggling with a number of potential low pressure regions along the monsoon trough. So you can see here in 7 days time that the monsoon trough lies up here in the northern Coral Sea, and is really, the model is really struggling with different eddies on that trough. So it has a trough, it has a tropical low there, but it also in some of the ensemble guidances has that tropical low out here. It also has one a lot closer to the date line. So it really is struggling with which one of these is going to become the dominant tropical low. One of them should become a dominant tropical low, and according to the guidance that we have currently, we should see whatever is happening up there push to the west, and I'll show you why now. When we take a zoomed out view at the upper levels of the atmosphere, we actually see that there's a fairly dominant steering flow across the Coral Sea and across Australia of upper level winds going from east to west. Now that has been what has been lacking in the past, I guess, 3 years since Tropical Cyclone Yasi hit in the Coral Sea. We haven't been seeing too many periods where we've seen these east to west upper level winds. Normally the upper level winds come from west to east, and so they keep everything off the Queensland coast and they keep wind shear very high. Now at that point in time we're going to see those east to west winds, and guidance is pretty clear on that. But it's a matter of how long do those east to west winds remain. And so because the system starts from way out here towards Fiji, pushes in a westerly direction, it's a real roll of the dice as to how long we can keep these conditions in the Coral Sea. Normally, there's an upper level trough that pushes into the Coral Sea sometime usually between 4 to 7 days. So it really has a window of 4 to 7 days to push west. How far west it pushes in that time before something can get a hold of it and push it more to the south or southeast is going to be the key here. Some of the guidance suggests that this will form into a cyclone and it will push west and it will hit the Queensland coast. Other guidance is showing us that it will remain a low, push west and hit the Queensland coast. Other guidance is showing us it'll become a cyclone, push fairly close to the coast in the central Coral Sea, and then start to push in a south or southeast direction. So it is a bit of a luck of the draw thing at the moment. We're looking too far ahead to be certain, but what we can be fairly sure of is that something will form here and push to the west initially into the Coral Sea. What we can't be certain of after that is in the 10 or the 9 day plus mark, whether those east to west winds in the Coral Sea in the upper levels will hold. So if we assume that there's going to be some type of disturbance out here in the eastern or northeastern Coral Sea, let's take a look at the surrounding environment around it at the time, and we can see that wind shear values are extremely favourable for tropical cyclone development at the time. So if there's a low located out here next Friday, and remembering I've used the word if there's a low located out here next Friday, it's going to find itself in very good conditions for further intensification and development. Now, the key obviously becomes, can we get a low in there at that particular time? If we look at the amount of moisture in the mid-levels of the atmosphere at that time, we have most of the Coral Sea is fairly full of really nice moist conditions throughout all levels of the atmosphere. There is a little bit of dry air up here towards the Bowen, Townsville, Cairns, and just to the northeast of that, but that wouldn't be wrapping around the low pressure system. It's still located on the monsoon trough, so there's no issue with moisture at all. So really, if there's something out there late next week or into next weekend, it should be all systems go for development. Time will tell to see whether or not we can get something in there. So now taking an extremely long-term look at the ensemble guidance that we have available freely and publicly, we can see that there is very clear signs on the ensemble that something exists out here that is of note. So we can see that there's either going to be a low, maybe a TC, something will be located in the Coral Sea or the far western Pacific at that particular time. This is on the 27th of January. There is a very strong ridge underneath whatever's happening there. So that's a high pressure system right there on the bottom right of your screen. So there is ridging at the surface at least. So whatever's located there, at least the surface part will want to push to the west. Now the other area that we need to be focused on, and just a very weak signal, is out here towards the Timor Sea. There is a weak signal of a potential low pressure system developing out there. Now that's all going to start from the Gulf of Carpentaria. It's going to push west across Northern Territory, and then is at this stage we won't say likely, but there's a fair chance that a tropical low will form in this region on days 7 to 10 or 7 to 12. So at this point in time it's only likely to be a low. There isn't a very clear cyclone signature on this thing, but there is certainly something brewing there in terms of a low pressure signature. So this is well and truly after the fact of what's going on right now in WA. This is a whole new system, but it should start in the Gulf as a convergence zone or a convergence line and push westwards, and then possibly forming into a low out here. At this stage we can't tell you which way it's going to go. It's too far ahead. If we just have a bit of a look at the upper level conditions and what we're expecting the upper levels around that time, we really have ridging right across the southern half of Australia in the upper levels. Most of the guidance is suggesting there that we've either got a recognised big upper level high, or just a generalised very slack pressure pattern or very slack wind pattern in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Therefore, anything that's located up here in the Coral Sea or out here in the Timor Sea or Southeast Indian Ocean, likely to be quite slow moving, and then is likely to be guided more by the low to mid-level flow rather than the upper level flow if the upper level flow is so slack. So it's going to be slow moving, and as I said about the Coral Sea one, initial guidance suggests whatever happens here will be pushing westwards at least up until day 8 to 10, and whatever happens here, it's going to be slow moving, and there's no real guidance either way as to what it does. Climatologically, we would expect that to be moving in a southwest direction. That's what they normally do at that part of the world. Looking at the GFS ensemble, we still see the Coral Sea system out here on the GFS ensemble, and we still see some type of system out here along the Pilbara or Kimberley coastline in the ensemble as well. As well as that, the ensemble wants to form something in the Gulf as well, so it does go a little bit crazy when it comes to an active monsoonal period. But what's the key difference here between the GFS and the European is what happens to the Coral Sea system. The GFS ensemble wants to develop an upper level trough and push the system in a south to southeast direction, as it has been the norm in the Coral Sea for the last few years. So at this stage, there's very different model guidance what happens after about day 10. But up until day 10, models are pretty clear on the fact that they want to form something from the Fiji or Vanuatu region and push it westwards into the Coral Sea. It's what happens after days 7 to 10 that is where we start to see a lot of model variability. Thanks for watching tonight, folks. We'll keep you up to date. Look, at this stage, there's no cyclone threat for the next couple of days, so we won't update tomorrow night. We'll update again on Sunday night for you and tell you what the latest goss is on all this stuff. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. Talk to you Sunday night.